Once you have that experience of a good reading and you get that awareness, then you can open your mind and your heart to like, oh, they're not completely gone. Of course, we would do anything to have them back in the flesh, but I can continue a relationship with them.
Today's guest is Dr. Laura Berman. Dr. Laura Berman is a world-renowned sex, love, and relationship therapist with more than 30 years of experience helping people learn to love and be loved better in mind, body, and spirit.
I think primarily our universes have crossed less because of my work around sex, love, and relationships, but more around grief and grief healing. But I have really stepped very deeply into grief healing, into healing after loss, in particular, after losing my son, Sammy, 4+.
She holds 2 master's degrees and a PhD from New York University and has built an internationally recognized career as a trusted voice on intimacy, relationships, and personal growth.
But she starts singing Sammy, Sammy, Bo Bammy, Mo Me, My, Mo Mammy, Banana Fana, Fo Fammy, which is what I used to sing to him all the time when he was little. And he loved it. And then and I turned to her and I was like, why are you singing that? And she's like, well, because you said you weren't feeling him. So I checked in with him and he told me to sing that to you.
Dr. Berman's life was forever changed when her beloved son, Sammy, forever 16, was killed by fentanyl poisoning. She also shares ways she continues her relationship with Sammy, who sends her signs and still communicates. To explore her resources on moving through loss and reclaiming your life, join the Grief Healing Collective, the supportive and healing membership she created for anyone who suffered a loss. And now for my conversation with Dr. Laura Berman. Hey everyone! I'm really excited to let you know about the Science and Spirituality salons I'm now hosting. During these intimate events, a scientifically verified psychic medium will give all of you readings, and I will give a talk on the science and evidence that changed my mind about an afterlife. This will also be an amazing opportunity to get to meet some of you in person or virtually, and to share more about all the science and data that transformed my worldview and got me through my worst days. These can be hosted in your home, in a nearby cafe with a private room, or they can even be virtual. I've hosted a few already, and they were really special, fascinating, emotional, evidential. So if you're interested in getting a small group together over dinner, brunch, drinks, coffee, to learn more about the science and to get evidential medium readings, send me an email at hello@wtfjusthappened.net and put science and spirituality. Dr. Laura Berman, and first of all, thank you so much for having me on your podcast, which I hope all of you listen to as well. Her podcast is so helpful and so wonderful. And so tell us a little about yourself, your work, your podcast, books.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on. It was fun to have you. I've been a love, sex, relationship therapist for 30 years. I've had a long career, written 10 books, most recently Sex Magic that just came out, and launched the podcast right in the middle of the pandemic, The Language of Love, which is all about love and intimacy and relationships from a mind, body, and spiritual perspective. But I think primarily our universes have crossed less because of my work around sex, love, and relationships, but more around grief and grief healing. And that really, I still have not abandoned my past career, and I still am deeply entrenched in that. But I have really stepped very deeply into grief healing, into healing after loss, in particular, after losing my son, Sammy, 4+ years ago. It was February 7th, 2021. So I had many losses before that. Like you, I had lost my dad. I wasn't as close to my dad as you were to yours. I mean, I was very close to him, but my dad was a wonderful, brilliant, slightly toxic, sometimes very toxic narcissist who I was the caretaker of for the last several years of his life. So I was prepared for that loss. And my mother's loss several years before that, who really was my person, and my grandmothers. I was with all of them when they had transitioned, including my spirit mother, who was really like my second mother. And that all had happened before Sammy's death. But that was the one that all of them transformed me, obviously, but that was deeper and wider than anything I could have imagined and changed the trajectory of my life in every area, including my professional life.
First of all, I just want to say I'm so sorry for all of your losses. And of course, especially Sammy is.
Thank you.
Obviously so hard. Yeah. And now a lot of our listeners are in early grief. Mm-hmm. And how do you had, I don't want to say the benefit, it's hard for anyone, no matter what, but you were a therapist. And even if your focus was not on grief, you did maybe, I'm assuming, have an understanding of, as best as anyone can, how to navigate. Let's start with early grief. How did you deal with those first few months, first year, 2 years?
Yeah. I mean, look, for the first year, and thank goodness it was the pandemic, I don't know what would have happened if I was expected to leave the house. So I was really given a gift there timing wise, but I did not move, I don't think, for the first year. And so much so that ironically, I gained 45 pounds when I was pregnant with Sammy. And unintentionally, it wasn't my goal, but I gained 45 pounds again after his death, which is sad and slightly ironic. But, I had always dealt with grief and loss and counseled people around that because I'm a general therapist, couples therapist. Grief comes up, loss impacts all areas of our life. And I also think that I was, slightly more prepared because I had already written and really taken a very deep dive into the quantum field, so to speak. Before Sammy died, I'd written a book called Quantum Love, which was actually that journey that led to Quantum Love was inspired by the loss of my mother and what I went through after that. And so I already intimately understood what I think a lot of grievers at all stages don't necessarily know. You know this from your journey as well, but that, energy can't be created or destroyed. It can only change form. So I knew, as much as I was beside myself and unable to take the next breath in my loss and barely able to move or complete a sentence, there was another part of me that also understood that he was still there right beyond the veil. And so unlike you, I did not have to be convinced of that. I already knew that, even though I couldn't possibly wrap my head around any of it at the time. So I think that for me in particular, made the journey, the trajectory a little bit smoother in the end, but it certainly wasn't smooth. It was that. And I think also I had a very profound metaphysical, essentially a version of what I now understand to be a near-death experience about a week after he died. So I was on the beach, which has always been my healing place. It was, like I said, during the pandemic, so it was deserted. No one was there, but I was sitting out there just trying to breathe, because anyone who's gone through terrible loss knows that's one of the things that happens is you can't breathe. And energetically, the lungs are a big place where grief is held. And so and also you're just in so much pain, you forget to breathe. So I was just trying to take my next breath, literally, and sitting on the beach and just kind of rocking back and forth and hoping it would something would help me take the next step or figure out how to live or keep living. And all of a sudden I heard, and I am someone who has always seen things and known things. I have never been someone who hears things, voices, noises that aren't in the 3-dimensional realm. Like, I don't hear things, but I heard a very clear, booming, very compassionate and kind, but loud male voice ask me, do you want to live or die? And I immediately knew what that question meant, because in my case, I was not suicidal. I was not considering harming myself. But I knew several things. One, I knew that I didn't even know how to keep living, even though I didn't have an intention to not live. I didn't know how I would continue to live or how it was even possible. And also, when my mother had died 10 years prior or so, I was filming a show for the Oprah Winfrey Network. I was hosting a 5-day-a-week radio show. I didn't have time to grieve, and I didn't want to grieve. So I just kind of pushed through it, and, I didn't have time. I didn't let myself really go into the pain because I didn't want to, and because it was too big, and because I didn't have time. I had to keep myself together. I had 3 kids, 2 of them very young at the time. One was in high school. And so what ended up happening, my mother died of what was metastatic breast cancer that started in her left breast. And this happened when she was postmenopausal. It was not, anything. It was hormonally related in her case. But within a year of my mother dying, I, with no risk factors at 40 years old, no genetic markers, had breast cancer in the same breast that she did. And I had to stop my life, have a mastectomy, go through reconstruction, chemotherapy, like huge, huge ordeal. And that is what actually ended up breaking me open and leading to what became Quantum Love. But I knew when I heard that voice that if I didn't properly move through this process, because I knew back then that part of the reason that I had breast cancer was because I didn't let myself really release the pain that my body was holding. Now, this is certainly not to say that if you don't grieve, you're going to get cancer by any means. But in my case, we all have cancer cells in our bodies. And one of the things we know causes those cancer cells to grow is inflammation. And many things cause inflammation in the cells, but in particular, emotional stress, repressed emotions that are really huge, can cause real inflammation. So I knew even back then that was the case. So when this voice said, do you want to live or die? That's kind of what I was imagining. And so I said very quickly, yes, I want to live. And then I had this crazy experience where, it's hard to put into words. I know you'll understand this, but the best way I can describe it is, and this is, my friends who are mediums and psychics and near-death experiencers are the ones that basically have said to me, yeah, you went through a version of a near-death experience. Basically, my entire body, I had the physical, it's almost impossible to describe the degree of love and joy and aliveness I felt rushing through my body, showing me through a series of like quick life review pictures, images in my mind from the moment of my conception to now, showing me and letting me feel literally what a profound and insane to describe miraculous gift it is to have a life. Starting with the fact that sperm and that egg got together and divided and survived and grew into a baby, much less surviving birth, much less surviving my crazy family and everything else. Like, it was such a miracle that any of us get to have this life. And so I was like in tears with the grace of it and said, yes, I want to live. And then the voice said, well, then you need to go away and leave your family behind for at least a week and go all the way into your pain, or you're not going to be okay. You're not going to keep living. And my first comment after that was, fuck you. basically, because I was already in more pain than I could imagine. And I couldn't imagine going further into it, much less going home to my husband and my youngest son, who was still at home, and being like, I know your brother died like a week ago, but I'm taking off. But when it disembodied after this experience, like I couldn't ignore it. So I went home and told my husband I need to leave and go away for a week into the woods, into my pain, or I'm going to die. And God bless him. He was like, oh, okay. And that started the journey, and a series of other crazy, profound things we can get into. But that's really what launched my healing journey.
Well, first question I have, and then yes, I definitely would love to get into more of the profound things that opened up. But do you have any idea who that voice was?
I have thought about it. It definitely wasn't Sammy. I don't think it was, God in the big G sense. I do think I've thought about, why it was male. I think it was a guide, or an angel. It was not a voice I recognized. I thought, maybe there was a part of me that would have, I don't like to think this about myself, but would I have listened to a female voice I don't know, like, why was it a male voice? Because obviously I don't think there's gender on the other side per se, I don't know why it was male, except maybe there was an inner child part of me that would respond to that, or some higher power thought that would be what I would respond best to, or maybe just how my brain processed the energy coming in. I don't know. I have thought that it was, I feel like it was an angel or a guide of mine, that wanted me to live, and was giving me an opportunity to choose life in that moment.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds like a very, very important voice at really the right time. But it felt like an individual consciousness, even if not maybe your father.
It could have been a collective one. It could have. It could have been. But it came through as a male voice. It was almost like, in the old fashioned movies of like, Moses, you will, it was like that kind of voice. So maybe it was just a reference point from my childhood, from the 10 Commandments or whatever, that I saw as a kid. I don't know.
Okay. And you said this experience opened the door and you had many more insights into the other side, or I definitely would like to hear more about what you meant.
Well, I had always communicated with the other side. I hadn't done a lot of mediumship, or anything like that, but I always felt a spiritual presence. I felt my mother's energy and my other loved ones. I felt guidance from them. But what happened, I think several things happened. First, when I went, what I ended up doing was going to a place called 1440 Multiversity, which is in the mountains of Santa Cruz. It's in Scotts Valley in the middle of the Redwood Forest. And it's this beautiful retreat center where I had done professional workshops and things in the past. And when they heard what had happened to Sammy, they reached out with condolences and said, look, we're closed for COVID, but if you want to come cocoon here, you can. And I had no intention when they sent me the message. I thought, oh, that's sweet, but I had no intention of taking them up on it. But when that voice gave me those instructions, I was like, okay, I know where I'm going. And I called my best friend, who is just like the world's best space holder. She can handle those big, messy emotions and not, you don't have to take care of her. And she was like my grief concierge. She came and picked me up. And the next thing I know, just these miracles started happening. I don't even know how it happened. Her friends, my friends, all of these healers started coming out of the woodwork. People we knew locally, but also remotely, who were doing sessions with me. So my days became there. I was there for a week, and my days were just filled with body work, grief yoga, breath work, therapy, Reiki sessions, forest bathing, mediumship, just all these people coming through. I prayed for the first time. I had never prayed in my life. And even though I had a sense of spirit, I really didn't have a two-way or personal relationship with any higher power. And my friend, Catherine Woodward Thomas, came to visit me in the woods. And she asked me if I had prayed. And I said, I don't know how to pray. Will you show me? And I still have a recording of it that I listen to all the time. She said the most beautiful prayer as I was sitting in the arms of the mother tree, which is what I did for several hours a day, the mother tree of the whole forest there, sobbing into her branches. And I had, again, as I was listening to that prayer, just flooded with that feeling of grace and the beauty of life. And there were so many moments during that week. I went all the way into my pain, but what I felt again and again, and what I was experiencing was that I was being held, and this is what's really important that I didn't fully understand before this, and what I try so hard to help other grievers understand is that the way, obviously there's no way out of this but through it. And we're scared to feel the depth of our pain because we imagine there will be no bottom. Yes. And I will get lost there. But there absolutely is. You will reach, after even just like 10 to 15 minutes of letting yourself fully feel some pain or some anger or some grief or whatever's coming up, you hit a sandbar. Like, you may not hit the bottom of the ocean, but you definitely hit ground. And you feel lighter and clearer and more stable, and your vibration rises. I could feel that because of all my years with quantum love, I understood that whole book was about how to harness your body's energetic frequency to kind of create the love life you want. But it was also about how energy can't be created or destroyed. And so what I quickly started realizing is when I would move my body unintentionally, just through releasing something big, my vibration would rise. And then that is when Sammy would come through. That is when I would experience him or hear a message from him or see something, or the medium who was coming through would say something, or it was just like immediately. So I'd be sitting there, I just like I did with my mother, who I chose sort of like you, maybe not as scientifically and rigorous and doubtfully as you did, but I chose for my mother, it was in March in Chicago, which is freezing still. And I was living in Chicago at the time. And I said, okay, Mom, you're a hummingbird, because there's no way I'm going to see a hummingbird in Chicago in March. And I went downstairs to take my kids to soccer practice or hockey practice, and they were watching a documentary on hummingbirds. And every single day for an entire year, I saw a hummingbird, rarely in person, but a picture, a work of art, a tapestry, a coffee cup, a documentary, whatever. Like, I would see a hummingbird every single day. And with Sammy, I did butterfly and also wind chimes without wind. And he would do that. There would be no wind, and then the wind chimes would start going. So all kinds of things, symbols and signs like that were happening. But most of all, I could feel him. I could feel, I talk a lot about all of us have what's called a soul signature. It's like the quality and the feeling of our energetic frequency. I mean, our energetic frequency is constantly shifting and changing, but within a range. And it feels a certain way. Like, you could even close your eyes and imagine, what even someone who you care about who's living, one of your kids or your siblings or your parents or your friends or your partner, you can feel the quality of their energy, and it's different than yours. And I could feel it. I could feel him coming in me and around me. I could feel when I was attuned to it. I just kept having experiences like that. And then certainly as we progressed, I would get messages from all sorts of my amazing medium friends, and they weren't telling me anything. I didn't need to be convinced. They weren't telling me anything I didn't already know, but it was still beautiful confirmation again and again that what I was feeling was real.
If you want to learn how I went from being a skeptical atheist who thought there was zero chance of an afterlife to a skeptical atheist who thinks an afterlife is highly probable, come check out my books, WTF just happened?
But it was still beautiful confirmation again and again that what I was feeling was real.
Yeah, wow. Well, lots to ask you about all of this. So with mediums, is there a message you got that blew you away the most, either the most evidential or the most profound?
I would say what I have had less specific messages that are super profound, certainly confirmation, but I've had energetic experiences, in particular with my friend Susan Gra, who's a really beautiful evidentiary medium. And I'll tell you about that in a second. But like, for instance, I now run grief retreats, several of them a year for all kinds of grievers. But I do one in particular in the spring back at 1440, where I went the first time, because at the end of that week, I went to the mother tree and I made a promise, like, I don't even know that I could afford to do this if I were paying for all of this. And I have to make this available for other mothers, because I don't know how you survive something like this otherwise. And so I made the commitment then to bring a group of mothers every year. So now we've just done our second year at 1440. They partner with us and with my foundation, Parent Collective, and we bring 90%. Last time we brought almost 70 mamas, the time before 65, almost all of them on partial or full scholarship. So Susan came to both of those retreats. And so on the first retreat, we were driving there, and on the way, as we were getting and packing up the car, I was like, I just mentioned in passing, I've been so busy getting ready for this retreat, I haven't even really slowed down enough to tune into Sammy. I'm not even feeling him right now, and I didn't think anything of it and just got in the car, whatever. And then as we're driving, she just starts saying, and this is, she's a relative, she's a friend I made after Sammy's death. And it's not like we've spent hours and hours discussing Sammy's personality and childhood. We're mostly, if we talk about Sammy, it's about things he's saying or coming through with or whatever, or things about grief. But she starts singing, Sammy, Sammy, Bo Bammy, Mo Me, My, Mo Mammy, Banana Fana, Fo Fammy, which is what I used to sing to him all the time when he was little. And he loved it. And then as he got older, it annoyed him, but I still would do it. Or I'd say, Sammy, Bo Bammy, will you, blah, blah, blah. It was like a joke. And I turned to her and I was like, why are you singing that? And she's like, well, because you said you weren't feeling him. So I checked in with him and he told me to sing that to you. So, that's just one instance. There's so many moments like that. And I've now, of course, watched her read hundreds of other people at many of my retreats. And, I just watched her read, it was another mother actually, who was not really a believer. She had some religious blocks where she was not really open as much as she wanted to be. And Susan said to her, I don't know why, but he is showing me him. He was almost like a cheerleader or pep rally person. And she's like, I want to dance. I want to moonwalk. Like I'm seeing him moonwalking. And I forget what song, Thriller or something, or singing a Michael Jackson song. I forget which one it was. And the mother started crying and pulled up a video that her son, died in like his early 20s. Her son's friend had just found a video of her son, Justin, who at a pep rally at his school, moonwalking to Thriller, getting the crowd into a frenzy. Wow. There's just instance after instance like that. But for me in particular, so there's constant confirmation. I live in that confirmation. And it's one of the reasons that I feel really good mediumship with someone who's really trustworthy and knows what they're doing and is legit is such a huge part. It's one of what I call the 6 pillars of healing. It's such a huge part of healing for people after loss, because once you have that experience of a good reading and you get that awareness, then you can open your mind and your heart to like, oh, they're not completely gone. Of course, we would do anything to have them back in the flesh, but I can continue a relationship with them that goes beyond time and space and goes beyond the physical. And they are right there beyond the veil. And that is such a big milestone I find in healing for people. So I always have mediumship at all of my retreats. But what Susan has helped me do several times now is actually play with his energy physically. So to blend with him, to bring him, his energy, his soul signature inside of me, we play this pushing game where she showed me one night, this was right before we did the first retreat. We were out in the woods at the mother tree late at night, and she was showing us how to see these wisps of spirits, which I was starting to see. But then she said, Sammy's right there. I was like, I don't think I'm seeing it. She's like, well, here, play a game. Sammy, I want you to push her, but not too hard. She says to me, stand really firm, like stand strong. And Sammy, you push her. And I start falling back. Like I could not stand upright. And I'm like, no, that's bullshit. And for 30 minutes, I was cackling by the end because I would just be like so strong, like a trunk of a tree. And I'd say, okay, now, and I just fall back. And I told, several people about this. And I told a group of my close friends, one of whom is absolute unequivocal non-believer, like does not believe this stuff. And she came up, we went to see a tree where we went to revisit a tree when we were on a trip together, where I had put some of Sammy's ashes. And so we were hanging out around the tree. And then later that evening we were at dinner, and she sat next to me. She's like, I just have to tell you, without telling you, I decided to play the pushing game with Sammy, and he pushed me too. And now I'm a believer. So I think, I've taught a couple of people how to do it, and I think anyone can do it. But they can play with, you can play with their energy, which is really cool.
Oh, so is that something you will teach people? Like, can people reach out to you if they want to learn that? Do you teach classes on that?
I do teach that. I teach people that all the time. And I actually am just handing in the manuscript of my next book, which is called Crying Out Loud. That comes out the summer of 2026. And I teach people how to do that, how to blend with their energy, to bring their energy in. But yeah, I love to teach people how to play with their energy and how to connect with it, how to raise your own vibration in an authentic way, not where you're like bypassing your pain, but you're able to process your pain enough in the moment that's the irony when we need them the most, when we're in the darkest of the dark. When we leave our bodies, our vibration is so high, no human could ever reach it. And it's really hard for them to reach us when we're in our lowest vibration, which is guilt, shame, depression, all those feelings of profound loss and grief, which are very real and shouldn't be bypassed. When we need them the most, that's when it's hard for them to reach us. So when you allow yourself to release emotion, it's like taking a really big constipated poop. You feel lighter and clearer, your vibration rises, and that's when you can start to really connect with them.
That's a fantastic analogy. I love that you bring so much lightness and humor to all of this too. I think it's the only way to get through all of this. Now, you said you've always seen and known there's an afterlife. Am I correct? Or has it been a long time, or has it been something your entire life you feel? Or was there something that happened?
No, I've always seen and known things that other people don't see and know. Not necessarily around the afterlife. But when I was a little girl, I would see little spirits or little fairies. No one in my family, there was nothing like that. I did not grow up. They were all like hardcore science-y 3D people. So I didn't have a reference for it. It was really scary to me. I would see it a lot. But then when it started happening a lot at night, my parents were really strict. I wasn't allowed to go for help, or if I was scared or anything like that at night, I was on my own.
So hard.
It was like a perfect storm. I was so scared. Everyone was telling me it was my imagination, and I had no grown up or no safe space to make sense of it or to comfort me when I was scared. So I just shut it down, hardcore, shut it all down. But then as I got older, And especially after my mother died, I started that was really my reawakening. That year that I spent nursing and getting myself back to health and going through chemotherapy and diving into quantum physics and what eventually became quantum love, that is when the door opened. I think that what happens is, I call them AFGEs, another fucking growth experience, like these things that break you open and apart. Open your mind. They break apart your ego. They break apart your identity. They break apart your heart. And that's when, just like with you, that's when we can kind of open to other possibilities. And then the door cracks open, we peek through it, and then we're like, holy yet, and then you walk further in. And so I feel like those experiences are often, and grief is one of those things that is a gateway, a portal to awakening. So certainly when I lost my mother, who was my biggest, deepest loss before Sammy, that's when I started opening and hearing things again. And now I could make sense of them. Now I had guides and teachers. So like years ago, I remember I was doing a radio show on Oprah Radio, and it was 5 days a week, a live drive call-in show on Sirius XM. And I had this guy on, Robert Ohado, who turned into a really good friend. And this was the first time I was meeting him, and my first exposure to an intuitive. I didn't even know what I was like an intuitive. And so he's explaining to me, and then he's taking calls. We're taking calls and he's giving them intuitive readings, but I'm getting the same information before he says it. And I finally turned to him and I was like, wait a minute, I think I might be an intuitive too. And he's like, Laura, duh, you totally are. And so I started cultivating it all again. And then I would use it in my work. I started to really cultivate those natural skills, which, by the way, I think we all have. Just some of us are born with more access to it or more of those channels open. So by the time Sammy left, I had 10 years of really cultivating this awareness of knowing things, seeing, like, I could talk to a client, a couple, let's say I was doing therapy with, or an individual, and I would just see the movie of what I would call their point of fracture, like a memory or a scene where they really lost connection to how worthy of love they are, or where they really disconnected from their worth or had a major body image crisis or something. I just started taking it as rote. It was just part of who I am and part of what makes me effective in what I do in the world. But I would say communing to the extent that I do now really started hardcore after Sammy.
Right. And so you've had a lot of signs, communications. Is there what I call the biggest what the fuck? Just one that you were just like, this takes it to the next level, even blew you away, of communication or sign or message?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was those physical experiences that the first retreat the night before was the pushing experiment. Mm-hmm. Then I was at a conference and there was a medium there and he was showing us how to blend energy. And I took Sammy's energy into mine and I just sat there sobbing because I could literally feel him. I could barely breathe. It was such a high vibration, but I could feel him and I was just beside myself. And then when it ended, everyone was kind of, coming back and I was just sitting there like snotting. My friend was sitting next to me and I was like, no, I'm okay. It's just tears of joy. That was a profound. And then the night before the last spring's retreat, the Big Mama's retreat, I was with Susan again, and she helped me have the experience of energetically hugging him, where I could feel. So I was feeling this like beautiful, warm, loving energy just dripping all over my arms. My arms were out like I was hugging him. And later, my two girlfriends who were there with me, both said individually, like they weren't comparing notes, there was like smoke dripping. It looked like almost smoke dripping off your arms. I could feel the energy. So when I've had these physical experiences, because like I said, I'm not that surprised. Sammy Bo Bammy. I mean, there's so many things like that where he's said something or shown me something, or a butterfly will come like right as I'm talking about him, or he loves to flick the lights and I'll play games with him. Well, I'll say, okay, now stop. Okay, now start, and like we'll go back and forth. Or I love having him pick songs. I'm listening to a random mix on Spotify or Apple, and I'll say, okay, give me a song that from this random mix, it's not my music, that will let me know you're with me today. And then, the spinners will come on with, whenever you call me, I'll be there. Whenever you need me, I'll be there. I'll be around, like, come on. So yeah, I've had a million experiences like that with him.
I have also a question about the pushing games.
Yeah.
Does it feel like his personality and way of playing, like the way people would engage and play, would it be very based on the energies and personalities of your person and different games?
No, I think you can play a pushing game with anyone. I don't think, I would encourage you to try it. He's very funny and punny, and does have a really good sense of humor. But no, it wasn't like unique. I mean, he probably would have been someone who'd be like, yeah, let me try to push you over. Let's play a game of chicken, or whatever. Yeah. But no, it was just a way to engage with his energy.
And you mentioned that quantum physics and quantum energy ties into an afterlife. I think the same thing, and a lot of people do. I want to ask you to explain it, how you've come to think this, or how you would explain it. I feel like even though we all say the same thing who think this, we all say it in interesting, unique ways. So why do you think that?
Well, it's the basic premise of quantum physics and a fact, right? That we are all pure vibrating energy. So if we were to look at ourselves right now, and the computer screen we're talking through, and everything in my room and everything in your room, and both of us, if we were to look at any and all of that through an atomic microscope at the most atomic minuscule level, there is nothing solid. None of us, no thing is solid. We are all, and everything around us is pure vibrating energy. We're just, I'm vibrating at a higher frequency than the table, than the desk or whatever, and you and I, and any of people listening here or watching, in order for any of us to perceive each other, we have to be vibrating at a harmonic frequency. So our bodies hold an energetic frequency that is constantly shifting and changing, but it's pure energy. And energy, the energy of which we're made, and everything else is made. And by the way, there's no separation, right? On the quantum or atomic level, we're all part of the same quantum energetic soup. We're just there's different variations in the vibration and the speed and intensity of vibration of our atoms, but we're all part of the same soup. So when our bodies die, our bodies are enervated by our energy, right? It's energy, and energy, the essence of us, the energy of which we're made, can't be created or destroyed. It can only change form. That's a law of physics. So when we die, we change form. Our bodies die, physical shell, casing, right? Where spirit's having a human experience in these human bodies. That is the miracle that's science, but that's also not science, but that's my sense of quantum physics. But it's also what I experienced that day on the beach, right? Like that pure awareness of the gift of having a body, to have a life, is an impossible to describe miracle that any of us get to be here. And so when our bodies die, our vehicle for being here in this plane, in this earth, ends. but the energy of which we are made continues on. And I like to think about it like, if you think about, there is like the oneness, the pure energy of which we're the source, whatever you want to call it, God, depending on your beliefs, is, I think of it as this huge, immense, infinite, gigantic, brilliant love light. And each of us in these human forms are one thread of that light. And we could get into all kinds of crazy stuff about multiple dimensions and multiple realities and blah, blah, blah. But like in this world, in this reality, we're this one thread. And then that thread goes back to oneness. It can also, be here, connect. They can do many things at once. People often ask me, okay, well, if I'm asking my loved one to give me a message or asking them to come for me, am I keeping them from anything else? No, it's not like a human being. Their energy is everywhere and everything. They concentrate it. They move it and they can move. That's why they can work so much with lights and with energy, because they work with electricity. They can easily manipulate that much more so than maybe, an object on a desk. So, but they can be here with us and a million other places at the same time.
Yeah, I think about this and quantum physics and multi-dimensions. I spend about 80% of my life thinking about this. So yeah, we could talk about this all day if you're on my podcast. But yes. But I guess my next question, I was just fascinated. You said one of your signs from Sammy is wind chimes with no wind. That's so fascinating. Can you give an example of a time that happened? Or does it happen like all the time?
It usually happens because I have it in the yard. It usually happens a few minutes. It's kind of it's become like like having tea together. I do a lot of moving emotions. I'm a big, big, big proponent of the somatic piece of healing. So, for the first year after he went, every single day, whether I wanted to or not, I would just like give myself the time and the space to let whatever wanted to come out, and roll around on the floor, stomp and scream into a pillow, beat the crap out of a pillow, cry hysterically. Once again, 10 to 15 minutes. And then you've cleared tons of density out of your system and are healing physically and emotionally so much more easefully. And your vibration is rising. And what I started realizing and noticing is that, I would go out into our backyard and I do it. We just recently moved. I do it in our new house too. We have a much smaller yard, but I still do it. And I would go out and just like put on some music and just let my body move. Sometimes I'd be just shaking around. Sometimes I'd be stomping. Sometimes I'd be beating the crap out of a bunch of pillows. Like it didn't matter. But every time I did, when I stopped and I'd just be lying there, the wind chimes, not even right next to me, but I wasn't doing anything to move them. With no wind, they certainly make noise in the wind, but with no wind would start just moving. And it would happen again and again and again. And then I remember there's this one day where I came out of I had this studio in our old house in the back, and I was just having a really hard time. And I just gone in there to just move some huge emotion. And I came out and I just looked at the tree and there was no wind in the yard. And I said, Sammy, will you just play the wind chimes? And they started playing. Now he doesn't do that every single time where I'm like, play the wind chimes and they immediately start playing. But more often than not, when I have a big release and so my vibration is rising, I think. And also that's just kind of a cue that's kicked in with us that I raise my vibration and he comes in. That's when I tend to experience it the most. And my husband, by the way, doesn't believe in one minuscule piece of this. He doesn't fight me on it or tell me I'm wrong, but he does not believe in it. And just like a few weeks ago, we have these, I don't even know how tall it's more than like hugely high ceilings in our bedroom. I don't know how we would ever change the light bulb, even if we wanted to. They're like vaulted ceilings. And I had went to turn off the overhead lights. There's several can lights. And as he wants to do, Sammy, he will often mess with my lamp next to my bed or the light. I barely even ever use this light, or our overhead light, because we have lamps and I don't know, I just didn't need it. But this light was on for some reason. And I went to turn it off because we were about to go to sleep. My husband was already in bed. And all the lights went off, but this one can light, and it just started flickering. So I look up at it, and I didn't say Sammy, but I look up at it and I say, okay, I get it, but can you please turn it off now? And then the light just goes whoop and turns off.
I know a lot of you have heard me talk about the Forever Family Foundation. They were absolutely instrumental in helping my grief and in changing my view of the probability of an afterlife. They use science-based testing to certify psychic mediums, have a scientific advisory board, and they host grief retreats. They will be hosting a special grief retreat this October in California, only for parents who have lost a child. The founders, Fran and Bob Ginsberg, who have become like parents to me, although Fran sadly passed in 2020, started the foundation after the passing of their daughter, Bailey, so helping grieving parents is dear to their hearts. This retreat will have psychic mediums and speakers. While they host many grief retreats during the year, having been through it themselves, they understand the unique type of grief and the safe environment needed for those who have lost a child. For more information and to sign up, go to foreverfamilyfoundation.org. I'll also have the link to this retreat in the show notes.
And all the lights went off, but this one can light, and it just started flickering. So I look up at it, and I didn't say Sammy, but I look up at it and I say, okay, I get it, but can you please turn it off now? And then the light just goes whoop and turns off. And my husband said, were you just talking to the light? And I said, yes, I was, because I was talking to the light in the metaphorical sense. But yeah, he does that stuff all the time.
And how does your husband make sense of it if he doesn't believe any of this?
I don't bother. Like, I didn't say to him, that was Sammy and blah, blah, blah. Because he's not, I was talking to the light. Or the other day, so when Sammy was little, all my boys, had boy sense of humor, and kind of like mine. I'm like a 12-year-old boy myself when it comes to my sense of humor. And
me too. I'm glad you said that. Yeah.
And Sammy put an alarm on my phone that, normally the alarm, you have all these different times, at least I do have all these different times where an alarm is set. So if I need to wake up at 6, I just go find and the alarm is always the same, like a ding dong ding or something. But there's this one alarm that he somehow attached, what were they called? The Minions, the Despicables. Or what was that movie? With the Minions, the yellow little people.
Yeah, I know the Minions. I can't remember. Is the movie called The Minions? I'm forgetting the name of the movie. I can't remember,
but it's this them talking. They talk like this, and one of them goes, "Oh, you farted! It stinks! You farted!" And they're yelling, ha, 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 in the Minion voice, and that's the alarm. And I think hilarious. It was probably at like 1:30 p.m., something we were going to do, and he decided to put that alarm on my phone. Well, ever since he transitioned, that alarm goes off at totally random times. I couldn't even tell you which alarm it will, if I set an alarm for something, it will go off. So all day long, because I have no memory, for this podcast, 10 minutes before an alarm went off, like anything in my schedule, I have alarms set. So all day long, I'm getting little alarms. Don't forget this call. Don't forget this interview. So I was talking to him the other day, my husband, and I was sharing with him how wonderful it felt to have both our 2 other boys, our eldest, who's 29, and our youngest, who's almost 20, both are in a really good place right now. And that rarely happens.
Right.
And I was saying how grateful I felt, how good it felt. And he was saying how good it felt. And all of a sudden, you thought it. Like this alarm goes off. I hadn't even set an alarm. Okay? And that alarm goes off. And he goes, what's that? I was like, oh, that's just an alarm that Sammy set on my phone a long time ago. And he's like, I guess you think it's a sign from the beyond. And I was like, yes, I do. And that's it. Right. Like he just doesn't, I feel really bad for him. I don't try to convince him otherwise, because what I've learned with him in 25 years of marriage is that any changes that he's going to make are going to happen because they come from him or because he's seen me model something. Like he doesn't, he's not someone who I can tell what to do. So he has to come to everything on his own.
Yeah.
But I feel bad for him. And, because he really does think that when you die, that's it. You're gone forever. And that's got to be really hard to live with. I mean, he lives with it and he makes tremendous meaning out of it. And he's does tremendous advocacy and is in Washington all the time and changing the laws. And he's, worked through his trauma and is healing. It's not like he's not healing and not doing well and not living fully. But, I feel bad that that's what he thinks, but I'm not going to convince him otherwise. I don't try to convince anyone of anything.
Right. Yeah. And you probably really can't. I mean, I used to think that, and until I started delving in,
right.
I don't think anyone could have convinced me.
Yeah.
And I mean, I wasn't trying to look. I didn't actually want to look, which is maybe part of it, because I just felt like the pain of getting my hopes up to have it shattered I didn't want any hope, because
I think that's part of what it is for him. He's alluded to that. He's like, either I'll feel horrible if it's true that I've been denying it all this time. And if it isn't true, I'll be so horribly disappointed. So I think he'd rather just assume it's not true.
You just touched upon the advocacy he does. I mean, we don't need to delve into it, but would you like to make just a mention in case anyone else would want to know about any of it and help in any way?
Yeah, well, we started a foundation called Parent Collective, which is intended to educate parents around the dangers of social media, and in particular, fentanyl that's out there. And also, my part, help parents heal who have lost their children to those dangers or in other ways. So the scholarships we give to the mamas at that one retreat we do with parents or with mothers comes from Parent Collective, and some donations, of course, from 1440 Multiversity. So what he does, I'm sort of entrenched in the healing and the metaphysical stuff and all of this stuff. He is lobbying and fighting with a bunch of different organizations. He's part of all kinds of think tanks and organizations, and they're trying to get, and they're making some headway now, trying to get what's become Sammy's Law passed, which basically says, it's so straightforward, but basically any social media platform that has children on it, if the parents choose, it's optional, those platforms have to allow third-party safety software. So there is software you can integrate with social media platforms if they would allow it. They don't want to allow it. That would ping the parents if your child is talking about suicide or drugs or bullying, anything that's putting them at risk. So in Sammy's case, when that drug dealer, which Snapchat, the algorithm matches you. If you want to know, if you are a parent listening and you want to know what is happening on Snapchat, make a fake account as a 13-year-old boy, okay? And watch what happens. The stuff you will be fed, the content that will be sent to you, the drug dealers that will be matched with you, it is astounding what goes on there. So, in Sammy's case, a drug dealer was matched with him and reached out to him with a colorful menu of stuff he would deliver to the house for a few dollars, one Xanax, a Percocet, whatever. Sammy was just a 16-year-old stuck at home, totally isolated during the pandemic and bored, and figured he'd try something. He was a straight A student, wasn't into drugs, or, was curious. Good kids make dumb decisions. And this guy delivered drugs to our house, which turned out to be pure fentanyl. It only takes a few grains of sand of fentanyl to kill you. And they putting it in about 75% of the street drugs, because if it doesn't kill you, it's 3 times more addictive than heroin. So it makes you into an amazing customer as well if it doesn't kill you, and they don't care, and it's cheap and easy to transport. And so Snapchat is kind of the vehicle through which these drug dealers reach kids. So if we had that software and even known about it, much less had it, Snapchat doesn't allow it on their platform. But if they did, then Sammy would still be alive, because I would have been pinged when that drug dealer connected with him, and I would have gone in there and, so that's what Sammy's Law is fighting for. And the lobbyists, for these social media companies that don't want anything, because they want it to be the dark web for kids, because that's why kids are on there. They are spending billions of dollars fighting, to keep all restrictions off social media. So that's what he's up to.
Sounds really good. I don't have kids yet. I mean, I'd want to give them, I think this sounds great. I'd want to give them the freedom to be on social media so they don't feel left out. But I would certainly, I would want to be pinged if like my kid is in those conversations.
Yeah, when they're crossing a line, when something is putting them in danger. But, it's also just social media in general. If I were a parent of a young child today, I would be putting a lot of my attention on building an entire coalition in my community with the sports teams, not just a few friends, but like with hundreds of kids, where we all agree to keep them off social media, because you can't keep them off right now, or they're isolated and don't know what's happening and are socially kind of isolated from everyone. But if you start early, where it's the norm not to be on social media, which has no redeeming qualities for the developing mind or for the adolescent, just read The Anxious Generation, that new best-selling book that came out a year or so ago, and you'll see what it's doing to kids and to adults, but especially to kids whose brains are still developing. I would keep them off it and create an entire community with at least 100 kids whose families also are taking the pledge. So as they're coming up and growing up and getting to that point, they have a whole community of people who are communicating through landlines and in person and playing outside and not anxious, full of eating disorders and drug dealers and bulliers coming after them.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, I really, I think it's something a lot of parents are trying to figure out and navigate. And
it's really tough. It's really scary. And there's nothing you can do, especially on Snapchat, where 85% of them live. The snaps disappear, right? That's part of the reason they like it. So you can't even monitor it. And even if you tell them they can't have a platform, they'll often go and create a fake one. So, the best thing you can do is just really educate yourself and talk to them and limit use and try to cultivate as much phone-free, social media-free time as possible with your community. But, and hopefully Sammy's Law will get passed this year, which would be amazing, because that at least puts some safety rails in place.
Well, hopefully there's anyone listening who wants to get involved. I'm going to put links to, all this and everything you send me in the show notes. So
awesome. Thank you.
I do want to ask you, it's a little bit of a twist, but I think it's kind of important, since you do write a lot about sex and intimacy. And I know this will only apply to a subsection of our listeners, and it's, not based on my loss. So, I'm basing this off of what other people have said to me in this position. And something I could imagine is people who've lost their partner. There is a lot of guilt around sex ever again. Like, they feel they made a commitment. They wouldn't choose to ever be with anyone else again. But, I want to say this as gently as possible. If it's right for you, it is okay. Some people want to, I don't want to use the word move on, but bring someone else into their life. Hope I said that.
Well, that's one of the beautiful things about love and the heart. We have the capacity. It's a myth that you only have the capacity to deeply and profoundly love one person. It doesn't, just like your children, people often worry when they're about to have their second child, I don't know if I could love another child as much as I love this one that I have. And you quickly learn you absolutely can. And it doesn't diminish the profound love you have for your first child when you deeply and just as profoundly, in a totally different way, in many ways, love the second child or the third or whatever. And, with romantic love, I really think it's the same way. I had an experience when my mom died. Within 3 months, my dad's started dating someone, and I was beside myself, like ready to freaking murder him. And felt like my mother was rolling over and this would be devastating to her. And how could he do this to her? And I was so indignant and so furious and so despondent. And then I had a lucid dream with her, which, is a dream where it's so real that it's like 3D and you're aware that you're dreaming while you're having it. And she was showing me like, look, it's fine. Where I am now, I have left behind, and I get this message 10,000 times. I have left behind my ego, my insecurities, my jealousy, my wounds. All I want is for all of you to be happy and to be filled with love and to be in your joy. Like, she was like, I don't care if he falls. It's taking nothing from me and nothing from the love we shared, and not dishonoring me. And this was 3 months after she died. I'm not talking, so that really stuck with me. And I've thought about that a lot. I think guilt and shame are the lowest frequency emotions and the most common places we go in grief. But what I can say is that what your loved ones want for you is to love, and you are not diminishing or dishonoring the love you have for them. When you're almost honoring it more, because the last thing they want is for you to become a shell of yourself and to not fully live and experience the gift of life you've been given. They want you to fully experience life in whatever way that means for you. And I won't even say, but it can be a hard transition for people. I'm saying that as a touch point and something for you to kind of hold on to, but it's not like I can wave my magic wand and eradicate your tendency toward guilt or shame or self-flagellation, right? Sometimes we need a little extra support to get through that. But I will say that you are not betraying your love for them or them when you love again. And I've met now so many people who have had, because I have a whole community of grievers that we have a membership community called the Grief Healing Collective. And so through that and through some of the other grief retreats I do, and just speaking to as many grievers as I have, I've met so many couples who got married and then, they're on the beach at their wedding ceremony and this double rainbow appears. Or they'll meet a stranger who will, accidentally say something to them that is exactly what their partner would have said in that circumstance, which, there are all these what I call quantum winks, or little messages that we get that are just confirmation of that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Hopefully that helps anyone feeling guilty, or the children of anyone who are remarrying or in a relationship or dating. I know you shared a little bit about Sammy already and some very hilarious stories, but are there some more memories you want to share about him a little bit so we can all have a clear picture of who he is, and special, anything you want to share?
He was insanely smart. Like, I would have to say to him, listen, he was much smarter intelligence wise than I am. When he was 16, when he was 14, he was. And I would say to him, listen, just because you're smart, like I'd have to acknowledge he's smarter than me. I'd say, just because you're smarter than me doesn't mean you're wiser than me. Like, that was the best I could do. But he was very funny. He had a hilarious sense of humor. He was, always making things and doing things. So during the pandemic, he created this whole ecosystem in a giant tank where he had like a gecko and snails and a sprayer, and he had it all on this app timer, and he built this whole kind of universe. We told him he couldn't, he always pushed the limits. We told him he couldn't mine for Bitcoin. He wanted to buy a Bitcoin mining machine. And a few weeks later, when he was at school, I heard a noise in his room and something coming from the closet. He had built a Bitcoin mining machine from scratch. Like, that's who this kid was.
Wow.
And as he has said to me many, many times, as he has come through other mediums or psychics or whoever, I could run circles around you, Mom. There's nothing other than maybe that safety software pinging me. Like, there's no way you could have stopped me from getting around you somehow, you know? Because he could run circles around anyone. He was so smart. But such a sweetheart. That really struck me because I was used to him in his adolescent self. But after he left, the coaches on his football team gave us a binder with all of these letters that his teammates and some kids in school had written about him. And then I started getting, messages on social media from his friends from camp. And it was just story after story of just the kindest, sweetest kid who would reach out if you were hurting or if you were upset about something, would make you smile or laugh. The teacher who he would bring a bagel to every day because he knew she loved sesame bagels. He was just, and I didn't see that side of him, because he was just but he was that way when he was little. And it was really beautiful to learn that he continued to be that way outside of home. At home, he was like, a teenage, whatever.
Yeah.
But I mean, we would still have fun and laugh together, but he wasn't showing me all of his little underbelly sweetness as much, except maybe at night, when he was tired. But yeah, he was a really cool kid and planned to go to NYU to study international business. He planned on being the world's first trillionaire, which he probably would have been. He had wanted to go that summer. He was going into his senior year. I think it was his senior year. Yeah. He wanted to do an internship with a real estate construction group because he wanted to learn before he left for college how to flip houses. He was just a really highly motivated, highly curious, insanely brilliant kid. And a lot of other kids didn't understand him, but the grownups all did, and he would say that to me. Like, I know when I grow up, everyone will understand me, but it's a weird place to be where only my teachers and other grownups really get me.
He sounds absolutely amazing. And as if even if he wasn't here that long, he sounds like he brought a lot to the world and sounds like he still does, He
does. He's still doing it. I had a woman at a recent retreat come up to me and say, and it really made me tear up because surprisingly, I'd never thought of it before. It's kind of strange. But she said, I came to one of your retreats a year ago and it saved my life and transformed my life. And here I am again. And all I want to do is tell you that I really want to thank Sammy. I feel so unbelievably grateful to him because if it weren't for him, you would not have been doing this. And if you didn't do this, I don't know if I would be alive today. And that really hit me, the ripple effect, in a really profound way. Yeah.
Wow. Well, yeah, that's wonderful. And yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I guess I feel that's a perfect place to end on, unless there's something else you want me to ask you before we get into where everyone can find you. Is there anything else you want to share before we do the closing out?
No, just that if you've experienced a loss, and certainly if you're experiencing grief, you don't have to just go through it. You can really grow through it. It really is a portal of transformation that if you're willing to go into it, you can come out and will come out a more tapped in, tuned in, empowered, self-actualized, beautiful version of yourself, even more so than you were before, because it burns away everything that doesn't matter and transforms you. It's a huge transformational force of healing and of evolution. And so if you're willing, it will transform your life for the better. Not that you wouldn't give all those gifts back to have your loved one back, but it is profound to what extent that's true when you are willing to step into it.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. And then lastly, where can our listeners find you, follow you, if you want to tell them anything about any of your offers, anything you want to share?
Well, if you go to drlauraberman.com, you can find everything there. But if you go to drlauraberman.com/grief healing, you will find all sorts of grief offerings, including my membership platform. I have a membership platform called the Grief Healing Collective, and we do live healing sessions with mediums, psychics, breath work, sound baths, something beautiful every month. We have meetups. I give you like a toolkit every month of something to try from each of what I call the 6 pillars of healing. Journaling prompts, guided meditations, all designed, and a beautiful community, because we really need community in healing and people who kind of get what we're going through. So that's a really beautiful offering that I've been just loving creating and being in. That's called the Grief Healing Collective. But you can get that at drlauraberman.com/grief healing and on all social media platforms at Dr. Laura Berman.
I know a lot of you have heard me talk about the Forever Family Foundation. They were absolutely instrumental in helping my grief and in changing my view of the probability of an afterlife. They use science-based testing to certify psychic mediums, have a scientific advisory board, and they host grief retreats. They will be hosting a special grief retreat this October in California, only for parents who have lost a child. The founders, Fran and Bob Ginsberg, who've become like parents to me, although Fran sadly passed in 2020, started the foundation after the passing of their daughter, Bailey, so helping grieving parents is dear to their hearts. This retreat will have psychic mediums and speakers. While they host many grief retreats during the year, having been through it themselves, they understand the unique type of grief and the safe environment needed for those who have lost a child. For more information and to sign up, go to foreverfamilyfoundation.org. I'll also have the link to this retreat in the show notes. To get more information on what the fuck just happened, go to wtfjusthappened.net. There, you can order my book, WTF Just Happened, A Sciencey Skeptic Explores Grief, Healing, and Evidence of an Afterlife. You can learn all about how I came to conclude that there most likely is an afterlife, but you can also learn about the early stages of my grief and the amazing, fascinating people I met along the way. You can read about how much I harassed the mediums and scientists trying to get evidence to see if the mediums were cheating and see if what everyone was saying actually was true. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to stay updated on any new developments and any interesting new what the fuck updates. So if you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. It makes such a difference, especially for a new podcast like this one. And if any of you have had a crazy what the fuck yourself, have any questions, feedback, or just want to say hey, reach out on either Instagram at WTF_just_happened_ or email me at hello@WTFjusthappened.net. I love hearing from all of you. It makes my day hearing your stories and questions and feedback and all of it. And remember, you don't have to draw any final conclusions as you wonder, what the fuck just happened?